So some questions have been coming up. How good was the Witch Queen expansion? We're about a month in. We just played through the raid. We've seen the loot, the content, the campaigns, and now is the time to really talk about where Witch Queen stacks up in comparison to other expansions, most notably Forsaken. Today, guys, I do want to talk about this because we brought this discussion up on stream, essentially Forsaken versus Witch Queen, and which one of them has had more of an impact. Now, I understand Destiny has had a crazy journey so far, filled with both good and bad, ups and downs, content droughts, as well as these expansions like the Witch Queen, as well as Forsaken, where there's just so much to do. Now, let me just take you back real quick to what 2017 was like. Everybody was just coming off of Destiny 1. Everyone was very hyped. But there was one thing that a lot of people said they wanted. They just wanted more Destiny. But what we got was not that. It was something completely different. And Destiny 2 at launch was probably the lowest of the low for Destiny 2, despite the numbers showing arguably the best ever. You had so many people trying out Destiny, especially considering it was coming to PC, but man, it fell flat. And that was essentially because at that time, for some unknown reason, Bungie was trying to mold Destiny 2 to be more casual, and really it missed the mark for what the Destiny community liked about Destiny and what we wanted out of a sequel. Now, the launch was a mess, and it was still a mess even with Curse of Osiris, and started to turn around just slightly with Warmind. Now, some things that made Destiny so different back then for my new light players that are just now tuning into Destiny for the very first time. Back then, we didn't have random rolls on our weapons. We also had high ability super cooldowns to have higher focus on gunplay instead of abilities. And I know that normally sounds really good, but it was ridiculous. Our abilities were also super weak. There was also 4v4 PvP game modes and things like Trials of Osiris instead of our normal 3v3. And of course, we had double primaries. This really changed things up. Not only that, running through content when Destiny 2 first launched literally only took like 1 to 2 weeks. One of the best ways to get exotics in year 1 was just doing public events. And that's all people were doing. Public events over and over, appealing to the casual player, but this took away all reason to do in-game activity. Also, the storylines were very underwhelming. Gaul was talked up to be this really big baddie, but honestly, there was really no connection there. There was no moment where we found respect for Gaul and what we have with our other antagonists. Curse of Osiris really wasn't much better with the Infinite Forest. And although aesthetically, I do enjoy the Infinite Forest, it really didn't feel that infinite. And honestly, it was kind of boring. And Warmind was the start of things turning around, but the Worm God Zol was definitely a letdown. It should have been much better, considering the buildup of the Worm Gods. And essentially, how we were led to believe that Oryx, Savathun, and Xivu essentially got their powers from the Worm Gods. And I know Zol is the weakest of them, but you gotta admit that Zol being just absolutely whooped in a single strike, considering he's a Worm God, was pretty anticlimactic. Now, of course, knowing what we know now, we have a better understanding of the Worm Gods. But back then, yeah, narratively, I wasn't that sold. Also, the business model back then was very different. We didn't have seasons. We didn't have a season pass. It was just DLC drops, and that's it. And you could basically do everything in like 2 weeks after a DLC would drop. And we understand that a lot of this had to do with Activision. They were pushing this model onto players through Bungie. They wanted the game to be accessible, casually friendly. They almost wanted to take a mobile game approach for a game that originally appeared to probably the most hardcore players out there. Now, to say that things had to change is an understatement. Things got bad. Players were dropping off tremendously. Overall daily population for Destiny nosedived. It was not looking good, which is crazy when you look at Destiny now. Destiny is arguably in the best place it's ever been. Being almost a month inside of the Witch Queen expansion and the Season of the Risen, player counts are up. People are loving the game, loving the story, loving the grind, loving the mechanics, mostly. And gone are the days of low player counts, static roles, annoyingly long content droughts, the Eververse grind, the lack of content, the minimal story, the terrible public event grinding. But what changed? How the heck did we get here, of all places? From the absolute monstrosity that was Destiny 2 year 1. And calling it a monstrosity isn't an overstatement. People were leaving the game. Destiny content creators were calling it quits. Hell, we even quit. Dado even made a video stating why he wasn't uploading much back in January of 2018, pre-Warmind, saying that Destiny 2 is not the kind of game that needs the coverage that I do for it. And that the next 7 months for Destiny 2 are going to be even more uneventful. And that most Destiny 2 content is a bummer to make because all of it is complaining every day, and that's not fun anymore. I know, even Dado was losing hope. And that's how it was back then. 7 months of absolutely nothing until June 5th, 2018, when Bungie revealed the Forsaken expansion and gave us teasers to the inevitable end of Cade 6. Spoilers, by the way. Now, the reveal triggered this domino effect throughout the community. Now, a lot of it was thanks to the marketing behind this expansion. People suddenly cared again because Bungie had the balls walls to kill off everyone's favorite character. Cade was the only real relatable character back then, and he was the comedic relief. He had two fantastic voice actors in both Nolan North and Nathan Fillion, and everyone loved Cade. When we got into the expansion, when we saw it firsthand, when we experienced it, finally, this sent ripples through the community. People weren't only talking about the game itself and what Bungie is doing to fix the state of the game, but they were also just pissed off that Cade died. Everyone wanted to avenge him. And understand, up until this point, Destiny 2's story was pretty weak. So that was the first domino, the narrative domino that really started to topple things over. Now, massive changes hit the game when Forsaken released. And I'm talking true game changers, fellas. You want to talk about a game that felt completely different from year 1 to year 2? Destiny was a different game leading into Forsaken. It was so big, it was one of the few times Bungie actually dropped the sandbox updates before the expansion. That's how big of a change it was. Within a single week, we got random roles back. I remember making my first video of an SMG, I think it was Trackless Waste, going, yo, this is what makes Destiny Destiny. And it was simply because we finally got random roles. Therefore, terms like meta and god roles started to become used again finally. The other big change, special weapons were separated from heavies. And Bungie even took it a step further. They allowed us to slot on double specials if we so wanted. Whether we wanted to slot it in the kinetic slot or the energy slot, it didn't matter. If you wanted to rock 3 shotguns, go right ahead. This change right here was more significant than even the Destiny 1 layout, because back then, you could only rock a special weapon in the energy slot or your secondary slots. Also, PvP went back to 6v6. We got 4 new maps, 5 on PlayStation, a new mode called Breakthrough. There was no longer this double primary team shooting. Abilities were also being used a lot more because we had things like the Go Fast update earlier that year. Supers and movement felt a lot better. And to top it all off, Bungie introduced weapons called Pinnacles. Oh, these were some weapons that made everybody's mouth water. Redrick's Broadsword, Luna's Howl, not forgotten. They were super strong and absolutely crazy inside of Crucible. There's also other subtle changes, like the leveling system change. And this was actually the beginning for how leveling was done to even this day. Powerfuls were introduced as weeklies for running playlist activities, no more grinding public events, as well as the introduction of Prime Ingrams. Bungie also introduced titles, badges, and of course the collections. And I know some of this is more relative to the hardcore players, but it was very nice. Another big change, Gambit. This was the first PvPvE mode. And man, look, we talk junk about Gambit now, but back then, people loved it. I talk about it all the time, how we were at Guardian Con, and I couldn't even get a single game of Gambit because so many people were in line all day long just to play one game of it. Now the subclasses, this is where things got crazy. We got 9 subclass branches and supers, 1 for each class for each element. Titans got Code of the Commander, Code of the Devastator, and Code of the Missile. Warlocks got Attunement of Vision, Attunement of Control, as well as Attunement of Grace. And Hunters got Way of the Wraith, Way of 1,000 Cuts, and Way of the Currents. Overnight, the subclass layout and meta changed. Suddenly, you had people getting their super back instantly with Blade Barrage and Shards of Galanor. Nova Warp was destroying everything, and Ursa Furiosa, in the beginning, was quite broken, especially in PvP. It was absolute mayhem. Now, we actually got a new weapon type back then, bows. This was a brand new weapon type that a lot of people didn't know how it would fit, considering this is a first-person shooter. Turns out, bows were fantastic, and they still are. I love bows. We got a new enemy faction called the Scorn, and destination-wise, we got 2 new locations, the Tangled Shore and the first ever in-game location, the Dreaming City. Now, the Dreaming City is still a favorite amongst many in the Destiny community, and here's some reasons why the Dreaming City was so great. It was an in-game location, the only of its kind. You had to grind levels even after finishing the campaign to be able to stand a chance here or in the Blind Well. Secrets, tons of secrets and hidden stuff everywhere. You had tinctures, which allow you to see platforms, which would lead to chests, shortcuts, or portals to the Ascendant Plane. Also, just exploring the Dreaming City was beautiful. And then, of course, the Ascendant Plane, which changed every week and had a brand new Ascendant challenge and was in a brand new location. There were Hamkara bones and eggs to find that led to rewards and lore. Blind Well was also pretty challenging, and it was the only way to get your supers unlocked at first. And high-power enemies were randomly around that you could defeat to reveal other secrets and chests. You would visit Mara every week and do the Oracle mission, and to this date, it's considered one of the best locations Bungie has ever made. Now, once the raid was completed, things started to change. We began to get curse weeks. The Taken appeared, and each curse week brought new things to the Dreaming City. Shadowthrone was the first ever activity given the name Dungeon and had secrets of its own, as well as the Wishender Bow. We also had the Wish Wish Wall. And then, of course, the Last Wish raid itself, which is arguably the hardest raid Bungie has ever created. All of this taking place, giving a story and background and lore to who Riven is. Why is Aldrin doing what he's doing? Is Mara still single? And then tons of loot. You want to talk about a lot of loot? Dude, Forsaken brought us 24 new exotic weapons and armor. Man, I remember we were making reviews sun up to sundown every single day. We also got 86 legendary weapons. Yeah, tons of new armor sets. This also began the beginning of the seasonal model. Now, it started with the annual pass and the season of the outlaw, but it eventually led to what we have now. Now, it wasn't necessarily a season pass back then, but it started that model off. And then we got Season of the Forge and Season of Opulence, which of course were bangers. And then of course the Season of the Drifter, which may have been the worst season ever. But regardless of that season, everything else was dope. Also, the cost of Forsaken was pretty nice. It's $40 plus $35 for the annual pass. Now, if we were to go into every single game-changing mechanic and system change that Forsaken brought into Destiny, we'd be here all day. But just going off of what we just went off of, which was a ton, Forsaken drastically changed Destiny for the better. And if you were there playing then, you were like me, just hanging on for dear life. Bungie managed to do a complete 180 on us. Everyone went from not really playing the game, actually hating the game, to non-stop, no life in the game once again. It was like we were back in D1, but even better. Forsaken absolutely saved Destiny, and it set a standard, a benchmark for Destiny going forward. A standard we haven't seen equally met, at least in terms of scale, until just recently. Which takes us to the Witch Queen. Now, the difference with Witch Queen and the state of the game prior to it is that it wasn't on the verge of death like it was prior to Forsaken. Not even close. People were always throwing that dead game meme around, but the only time Destiny 2 might have actually been considered a dead game was year 1. Now, that's not to say that the Witch Queen isn't a turning point for Destiny, much like Forsaken was. It was just in a different way. The Witch Queen didn't have to save Destiny like Forsaken had to. It just simply had to improve upon it without breaking things like what we saw with Stasis and Beyond Light. The Witch Queen is a culmination of 7 years of Destiny storytelling, where we finally come face to face with Savathun, the person who's been orchestrating everything. And Bungie's been hyping up Savathun for a long time, for years. On top of that, the Witch Queen introduced another kind of new enemy type with her Lucent Brood. And for the first time in Destiny history, besides Gaul, we had to go toe-to-toe with other light bearers inside of PvE. The Hive getting their hands on the light, being able to use these supers and abilities that we've used against them for years, right back at us. This was something that I don't think many of us saw coming. And by the way, if you're wondering if that's difficult or not to go against, just wait for Grandmaster Nightfalls this season. Lucent Brood are hell to deal with. And finally, the Witch Queen let us fully explore internally, completely, one of the pyramid ships. Now, the pyramid ships have been hinted at and teased at, and of course, we have Beyond Light, but we saw pyramid ships all the way back in 2017 after the D2 vanilla campaign. That cutscene right there was creepy as hell because none of us knew what the hell they were, and many of us just started calling them Doritos. Now, things that the Witch Queen added. Void 3.0. Now, this is slowly taking us back to the D1 days of being able to fully customize our subclasses. And honestly, this was inevitable. Bungie introduced Stasis with that layout. And sure, a lot of people said Stasis was busted, and of course it was, but that didn't mean people didn't like the customization that it brought. So inevitably, Bungie was gonna have to make these changes to our light subclasses. They also added new verbs. And this is something that was included with Stasis, but with Witch Queen, we had things like Devour and Volatile to really lean into that space-like cosmic subclass. Another huge change, Legendary Campaign, with, by the way, a fantastic story. This was the first ever Legendary version of the campaign that was actually a challenge. We had 8 long story missions that felt connected. We had puzzles, mechanics with interwoven dialogue and plot. Honestly, hands down, the best campaign Bungie has ever done. And they have set the new bar for how future campaigns are gonna have to be. Now, destination-wise, we got Savathun's Throne Royal. Similar to the Dreaming City, a beautiful location with tons of secrets of its own. We also got Deep Sight, which was an ability that allowed us to see secrets that weren't there before. Very similar to the Tinctures of Queen's Foil from Forsaken. And of course, a huge area to explore. One of the largest, most varied locations yet. Now, Lucent Brood. Even though we got scorned back inside of Forsaken, Lucent Brood, in my eyes, is a new enemy type. You battle them much differently than what you do regular Hive. Dude, when they pop their super, you run. If you don't, you die. You also got Moss that are buffing Hive and giving them overshields and exploding on you. And these Lucent Brood have things like grenades and barricades. And then, of course, after defeating one, you have to destroy ghosts. Now, arguably the biggest change with Witch Queen is weapon crafting. And this is just as significant as Bungie in year 1 of Destiny 2, going from static rolls to random rolls. This is a new system in Destiny where we take resources and materials and obtain a weapon pattern, deep sight weapons and elements, and then make them into a weapon of our own. They also added leveling to weapons that will unlock enhanced perks, these of which substantially increases the potency of our weapons. And then we got mementos. They can change how your crafted weapons look. Take the Gambit one, for instance, which gives you that animated shader. Now, I have my complaints here about weapon crafting, but overall, it's another way in which we can diminish RNG in the game and find target loot. Now, loot-wise, we got 42 legendary weapons, a raw loot pool resets, and of course the introduction of origin traits. Now, origin traits were a game changer for us. We did a huge breakdown over the lore of these origin traits, but these are additional intrinsic perks depending on where the weapon drops from, and of course, their foundry. Exotic-wise, we got 14 exotic weapons and armor, multiple new armor sets, and of course, the new weapon type called the Glaive. Now, activities, we ended up getting 2 new strikes, the Light Blade and the Birthplace of the Vial. And as far as Crucible maps, we didn't get anything new, but we did get the return of Vostok and Eternity. We also got the Wellspring activity, a new Vanguard playlist that included both strikes and battlegrounds, and of course, replayable campaign missions. Gambit also got a rework, which I think people still hate. Honestly, we're gonna make a completely separate video on Gambit here soon. I know. Are we beating a dead horse? Perhaps. Do I still want to fix Gambit? You're dang right I do. Now, the raid. Val the Disciple was, man, peak Destiny. People are saying this is the best D2 raid of all time. And fellas, it is quite a banger. Tons of story and lore that people are still breaking down even now. And the main thing about Val the Disciple was even throughout the raid, Bungie did such a good job of giving us small snips of what was happening narratively, who was controlling things. And then, of course, Rook, that was a completely different take on other bosses we have faced before. Most of the bosses were just this giant thing that we shoot shots into. We stand on plates. We move to the next plate. Yada, yada. That was pretty much it. Rook, though, this guy was way different. He would chase you down, kick you off the map, and talk mad crap while he was doing it. But I think the most substantial thing from this raid, at least for myself, was understanding the placement of the baddest baddies inside of Destiny. The Worm Gods, and the Hive, and Savathun, Zivur Wrath, Oryx, which was praised by the Hive, and of course feared by Guardians. We consider them the baddest of the bad, and the raid revealed to us that they were just pawns. They were just pawns for the Witness. And if Rook is any indication of what's to come, the whole theme of Lightfall is much more believable now. These disciples are bad news, and we had a hell of a time just dealing with one of them. Now, Season of the Risen also brought the Psyops Battlegrounds, which is story stuff tied to Kaido, her Scions, and of course the Cabal, and of course the Lucent Brood, and the relationship between Crow, Saladin, and Zavala. And it's actually pretty insightful to see all this, as this is interwoven throughout Witch Queen, despite it being Season of the Risen. Now, we still have 3 seasons to go, in which we're going to get both Arc and Solo 3.0. Now, the Witch Queen cost was $40, with each season costing $10, and I think many of us probably bought the deluxe edition, which I think was like $100. But let's talk comparisons here. Reviews for the Witch Queen are great. Metacritic gave it a score of 88, and literally every content creator has praised the Witch Queen's campaign as the best campaign they ever released, and it's not even close. Do you guys remember Curse of Osiris, right? Now, Forsaken was a huge expansion that made Destiny what it is today, and it is still, to me, guys, the most important turning point for the game ever. It was an immaculate content drop that is cherished by every Destiny fan, but I gotta say, Witch Queen is right there alongside it. It may have not transformed the game or saved it from its last dying breath, but it closely, if not completely, equals Forsaken in terms of impact, in terms of breadth, depth, story, lore, and the introduction of new system and mechanics. Now, both of these expansions serve as important points in Destiny's history. I would say that the biggest thing that Forsaken brought was that it actually gave Bungie the confidence to go out on their own, to break away from Activision. The turning point for Bungie was Forsaken, because right after that, Activision stated that both Destiny and Forsaken underperformed, and that they were essentially let down, despite Forsaken being such a banger. So in terms of impact, for Bungie, I think Forsaken was the most impactful. But for us, I think Witch Queen is the first expansion to reach the standards that were set by Forsaken, both successfully and substantially building upon the foundation with things like Void 3.0 and weapon crafting, all while showcasing a fantastic new world to explore and the best campaign and story to date. So to answer your question, which expansion was the best? Man, that's probably still gonna be up for debate. Regardless, both of these expansions for Destiny 2 were by far the most impactful. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.